Hi, Misty. Thank you so much for joining and doing this with me today.
I am so honored and thrilled, having watched your journey. I'm so proud of you, and this is just like an epic moment for you. And I'm just happy to be standing in your shine.
Oh my gosh, I have to tell you, I'm so nervous. And I know that you've written like a bunch of books, so you must know something about this, but I'm like, freaking out. I'm genuinely freaking out. It feels so much. It feels like my diary or something has just been like multiplied and like strewn all over the New York City subways or something. And like everyone's going to be reading it. That's how I feel. That was like specifically, that was the nightmare I had last night.
I totally can relate to what you're going through. I mean, you have so many titles. Share with us like who you are, all the things that you're doing, because I know that there are so
Yeah.
many on the list.
Yeah. Yeah. So, oh my gosh. Oh man. So 10 years ago, which sounds totally crazy, I made my way to Africa. My father was born and raised in Ghana, and he passed away when I was very little. So I don't know anything about Ghana or his side of the family. And I just fell in love with traditional Southern African shoes, which were called the felschoen or the veli for short. And it started out as this. Do you know this story?
I do, but it's
Okay,
good for
cool.
people
I'll tell it for
to
everyone.
hear.
It starts off with just leather being, it's so crazy because some of my friends like just don't know the story. So it started out with leather just being wrapped around your foot, and then being multiple pieces of leather tacked together. And then eventually, with the rubber tree and everything, they put a rubber sole on it and started getting laces. It evolved like slowly over time. And when British people came to Southern Africa, they saw the shoe. They fell very much in love with it. They brought it back up to the UK. They renamed it a desert boot, and they launched the company that you and I know today as Clark's.
Mhm.
Um, and I think actually being on the ground there and seeing that shoe and hearing about the story and hearing about how many generations like that craftsmanship had sort of seeped its way through, I was just so shocked because I didn't know anything about the history of that shoe. And I've been wearing desert boots, for years. And I just thought to myself, there has to be a way to really kind of incorporate artisans into the luxury fashion proposition, because I was working with the Himba women or this incredible tribe. They were showing me how to vegetable dye things. And I was like, wait a minute, this is like just as beautiful, skillful, rare, precious, incredible, dazzling, creative, artistic as anything that they're doing in Paris or Italy.
Yeah.
Um, and it's happening actually all over Africa. And so that was sort of the impetus behind me launching my brand, Brother Vellies, which I did at a lower East Side flea market with my entire life savings, which was $3,500, about 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
So it's been a really wild ride, and I talk about all of this in the book, of course. And then in 2020, I've always been a pretty big advocate and a little bit of an activist as well. And I think in 2020, when Mr. Floyd was murdered, a lot of people were calling and texting me just saying, what should I do? How can I help? And asking a lot of super valid questions. And I was on the phone with a friend of mine who was working with a major retailer at the time. And she said, they just made a $10 million donation to the NAACP, but people are still, angry. And I was like, $10 million is a lot of money, right? But I was like, at the same time, Black people spend more than $10 million at that store every day.
Hmm.
So that doesn't really make you like anti-racist or something, right?
Right.
Like if a friend of yours says something that's racist, you don't say like, oh my gosh, Tim, like go donate money.
Right.
You sit down and you talk with that person and you say like,
Yeah.
how did you get here? Like
Mhm.
what's the thought behind this? And like, how is this actually manifesting in your day-to-day life?
Yeah.
Um, and so she was like, okay, got it. But like, what would you want them to do? And I was like, well, I think that everyone should do the thing that they do the best in service of people who've been historically excluded. And she was like, okay, fair, but like, what does that mean? And I was like, well, Black people are almost 15% of the population. Major retailers should commit 15% of their shelf space to Black owned brands. And
It's amazing. It's amazing, like, to have come to this idea, from this incredible tragedy and just a culmination of, so much of our history in America. But I mean, that was something that I wanted to ask you about. I mean, after having started the 15% pledge, I clearly, I'm hearing why it was so important to you, but like, have you seen a shift in the fashion industry, after having done that?
yeah, thanks for asking. It was pretty crazy because I think, really quickly after launching it, literally 3 days later, I realized that this was going to have to be a nonprofit, right? And that we were actually going to have to partner with a lot of these companies. Sephora was the very first one that committed to the 15% pledge. Since then, we've announced 29 of the biggest retailers around the world. And I think what was important to us was really having them sign like multi-year contracts. So Nordstrom, for example, is on a 10-year contract with us. We sit down with them every quarter. We make recommendations to them of Black-owned brands that they should put onto their shelves. We put over 625 Black-owned brands onto the shelves of our pledge takers, which is totally nuts.
Yeah.
Totally.
Wow.
And I think, when you walk into a Sephora store these days, it looks different than it used to look.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I think for me, it was an idea that I had that day, right? And it was because I was an entrepreneur. I was seeing that, 90% of Black-owned brands didn't get access to the first round of PPP money, that 44% were expected to close as a result of the pandemic.
Mm.
And I know that Black-owned businesses are also the heart and soul of Black America.
Yes.
Right. And I just realized, like, hey, we need to inspire these retailers to step up and actually, do something that, by the way, isn't just going to be the right thing to do, Misty. It's also going to be incredibly good business. And, it's been almost 3 years now. And I can say proudly that hypothesis that I had that day has turned into a very real reality today.
That is so incredible. I mean, you're doing the real work. I mean, as I started asking this question, you have all these titles, you're in the fashion industry, but you're doing this work. You're, advocating for our community, like within this space. Now you've added author to the list, and it's just so impressive. And as you were saying, like, I can completely relate to that feeling. I remember my memoir, Life in Motion, came out, I think, like 12 years ago. And that feeling, I mean, I actually opened up all of my journals and diaries. Oh, I think it was actually 9 years ago. I'm like dating my
You're
age
aging
now.
yourself.
I'm aging myself. But having to be open and vulnerable can give so much to other people. And it also is like so healing and so cathartic, like within that process. At least, it was for me. Again, like, I'm so proud of you with this book, and it's beautiful. Tell me, just like, let's just start like at the beginning, like, where did this title come from, and like, what does it mean to you?
Oh my gosh. So Wildflower, I had a really tough time naming my book. Did you have a tough time naming your book?
It
No.
was
You're like, I knew the title.
no, it just made sense with everything I'd gone through. Like, my life from the time I was a child was constant chaos and in motion. And then just made sense with my life just continuing to be in motion, transitioning into being a ballerina. But
Right. No, that's amazing. The Wildflower kind of came from this thing that my mom and I used to do when we were little. We used to make seed bombs, which are like wildflower seeds with clay and dirt, and roll it into a ball. And then as we would go driving, if we saw like, an abandoned lot or a vacant field or something, we would toss these seed bombs out of the window. We would yell seed bomb, and we would just know that a couple of weeks later, there would be like a whole patch of wildflowers there. And my mom used to say to me, like, make sure that you always bloom in unexpected places, make sure that you do it with reckless abandon, make sure that you show up as a light in places where people are least expecting you, and make sure that when you look at things that don't look that beautiful, that instead of seeing something that is ugly, instead look at the opportunity that exists there in that space.
Beautiful and powerful.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like there was so much, I mean, this kind of like contrasting ideas where your mom gave you so many of those like nuggets, like from what I read in the book, you know, these nuggets of wisdom and just beautiful ways of looking at the world.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was also, you know, like conflict, and you were put in difficult situations, things you couldn't control as a child. And it's a difficult thing to reveal and to share. Like, what made you want to write this book, and why now?
Yeah. I love that you kind of touched on the relationship that I had with my mom, because I think of all the women that I know, I don't know that any of them have a simple relationship with their moms. And and I think that it's one of the things that we have the hardest time talking about. And I also think that expectation that we shift as women from being like who we are, Misty and Aurora, to just being like mom, right? And
Mhm.
there's all these like Cosby and Leave It to Beaver like archetypes that are then thrown around, and it's this impossible standard to kind of hold ourselves up to. And I think for me, the best thing that I could do, not only for my mom, but also for me as a woman, and hopefully eventually as a mother, was to let go of some of that, and also just realize like this is a woman who's navigating as best as she can in the world, and we are all just trying to make it happen every day, in spite of the world telling us to shrink, that we are not you know pretty enough, smart enough, successful
Mhm.
enough. We're not breaking enough glass ceilings. We're not like, the best wife or girlfriend or partner or best friend or daughter or any of these things. Right. And, on top of that, like she was a single mom. And I think that for this year on Mother's Day, I like really hope that we can kind of all start having more conversations about the pressure that we put on ourselves and each other, and also just forgiveness,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a number of people in the book that I think are were quite complicated for me in life, and sometimes there's a part in the book where I say like, it doesn't make it right, but it does make it human,
Hmm.
you know and I think even these days on social media, like we hold people up to these impossible standards.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, maybe you've experienced that. I mean, I definitely feel like I have, um, in my own journey, but where, I feel this sense of there's pride, and there's, responsibility, to be in this position, to be, pushing the boundaries in terms of, the things that we're talking about, and, being an advocate and being an activist. And sometimes it's like, but I'm still just human, and I make mistakes, and I may not say, the right thing all the time. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that, especially on social media. Have you come up against anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think social media is so difficult, and I think that people don't always even understand that the person on the other side of the screen is a real human that's probably going to read the message.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think they're just like tossing things out sometimes, and not understanding that like there's a high likelihood that like I'm going to see that. And
Yeah.
I think that struggle is definitely real, because you're never going to be like, everyone's going to have take a little bit of an issue with something, right? Because in so many ways it's a projection,
Mhm.
what you see in me is a projection of you to some
Yeah.
degree, right? And vice versa. And often it's like you spot it, you got it, for better or for worse. And I think that manifests in like a really difficult way on social media. But I have to tell you, Misty, I'm just so grateful that I didn't have to deal with the complexities of social media while I was a kid.
I completely agree. I can't imagine dealing with that. Like everything that you do, just growing and learning and evolving as a young person, and kind of putting it all out there that's going to just be there and live forever. It's a crazy time. And that's why I think it's so important to have people like you, that have a voice, and character, and are doing something positive for our community. And it's rare to see this day and age, especially for Black women. But we're out there, and I think it's
Right.
about supporting one another and motivating each other to do these things, that we don't have to continue to follow and perpetuate the same kind of stereotype of what it looks like to be successful, especially in your industry, especially, in the fashion industry. Like, I don't know, I'd love to kind of talk about where your love of fashion, like, even stems. Yeah. And like how that love has, shifted and changed and evolved throughout your life, because you've changed. And just from reading the book, it seems like you kind of started in one place and then realized like negative things about the industry, and then, the things that you felt needed to change. So where did it start?
So for me, it really came from my mom. My mom was adopted at birth, and she didn't know anything about her background or where she came from. And she kind of used fashion as a tool to explore different cultures. Like we would go to museums and just like look at some of the different like traditional cultural apparel that were there. And she would talk to me about, indigenous beading patterns and what the patterns meant and how they communicated with each other using those beading patterns, and different color stories in parts of North Africa and what that meant, and where they got the color from, right? Like, and what that meant for migratory pattern. I mean, it was crazy. She really taught me about fashion from like an anthropological perspective, which I truly value her so much for. And then I think as I got older and I started interacting with the industry, it felt so much more like consumption and commercial based, and less about the art and the expression, which was what really helped me fall in love with it. And I think my first kind of intro was through modeling, which I did like very briefly because I was not cut out for it for several reasons, but but I think it was just so hard to just be objectified in that way. And I was like, wow, people think this is glamorous. This isn't glamorous at all.
Yeah.
I did not feel empowered at all. Um, and I just would start thinking about like so much, especially in like the 90s and the early 2000s, like so much of fashion and so much of how women were being presented was not about empowerment or strength, even physically, right? It's like when I look at you and what you're able to do, so much of it is about like physical strength, mental strength. Like you really embody strength. And that's a huge part of what makes you so radiant and so beautiful, And so often with fashion, it's actually about the opposite, right? Like if you think of like 90s, like heroin chic, all of that, it was about women wasting away and their light kind of diminishing and becoming this like almost vacant version of ourselves, and like abandoning our body as a vessel. And I felt like that was painful, and that was not what I wanted to emulate or have other women, emulate. And I think but I couldn't stop loving fashion, right? And I think to truly love something, you have to be accepting of its flaws, right? And then understand what is a part of that thing that's not a negotiable, right? And then what are the things that are maybe just the weaknesses that can be overcome? And I believe that the idea of, disempowering women through fashion was something that could be overcome. And I believe that you could actually sell products to women by making them feel great instead of making them feel not enough. And
Mhm.
that's really how I've kind of reconciled with fashion. And I think now as like the vice chair of the CFDA, which is a very crazy thing, hopefully I can inspire my peers to also kind of think the same way.
That is so beautifully said. And like, I connect to it in so many ways, like to the ballet community and the, ballet
Yeah.
culture. You know, like the body type has evolved so much from the beginning of, when ballet was created. And you think back to these images of Degas paintings and, these kind of full, soft women doing ballet and tulle. And then, you come to the late 50s and early 60s, and with New York City Ballet and George Balanchine. And he really was influenced by fashion and by these
Right.
models and by Twiggy. And it completely changed the prototype of what a ballerina looks like. And it became, that heroin chic kind of, that thin, very pale, look that's really, I think, done our culture like a disservice. But I've always just had such pure passion for like what ballet is at its core. And like you're saying, like trying to do everything I can to come through those flaws and find positive ways of engaging young people, of engaging women, of engaging people of color to want to be a part of this art form. Because I think that, what they're seeing in media and through films, I think ballet is always seen in such a negative light, we always have an eating disorder. We're having an affair
Oh
with
wow. Oh wow. Oh wow.
there's so many stereotypes and tropes
Really? See,
that are
that's fascinating.
yeah, that's connected. And so I'm like, why would anyone want to be a part of this art form if that's what they're seeing,
Right.
you know, as depicted. So, that's been such a big part of the advocacy that I'm doing,
Right.
not just to bring more diversity into in the art form, but also, to show a truer idea of what it is to be an artist and an athlete and to be a ballerina, that I think looks very different from what you might, most people might think and see.
It's so fascinating because, well, first of all, when I think of ballet now, I think of you.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that's true for a lot of people. And
Mhm.
so just that, right, has complete, like, to me, the association that I have in my mind with you and ballet has completely wiped away those other things that you mentioned. It's not even on my radar. I think of you, I think of also this incredible video, which I'm sure you've probably seen before, of like this elderly lady. Do you know the video that I'm talking about where she's
Oh,
sitting
yes.
still
And she's listening to like, I don't know,
on
Swan
my
Lake or something.
yes, yes, and she's doing the things, and it's just like the power that the body has and the cellular memory that we have for, like, acting out our feelings and our emotions through our body is just so profound, right? And so healing, not just for the person that's doing that, for also the people that have the privilege of getting to see and experience it. And I just feel like I'm so proud of you for all of the work that you're doing in that space, because it is so healing, right? And
Yes.
and I think that dance is such a big part of how, as young women, so many of us like express ourselves also in private, not just in classes. Like,
Yeah.
not everyone can afford to go to class, and so sometimes even just with your friends at home or outside or anywhere, right? It's that
Yes.
communication tool that's like so authentic to us. It's like, what does your body want to do in that moment, you know?
I love hearing you say all of this, and just that's what you think of when you think of dance, and that's it at its core. That's the power of movement and expression. um but I feel like we have so much in common. First of all, my mother was adopted. I'm biracial. I didn't know my father growing up. I didn't meet him until I was 23. I mean, different than your situation, but I think that it shapes who we are and our perspective on the world. Like, I think that you in particular have a unique perspective as a Black person, having, grown up in Canada, lived in Jamaica, was it?
Yeah.
And then in the United States, like how have those experiences influenced your work in fashion, and like how you navigate through the world?
Well, someone was talking the other day on NPR, and they were talking about like the frog in boiling water. Have you heard this analogy? If you put a frog in water and you slowly turn the heat up, they won't realize they'll just boil to death, versus
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
they touch it, they'll jump out. And I think the situation in America sometimes is so difficult. And I think for me, coming from Canada and Jamaica and then coming to America, I was like, guys, the water's hot. The water's hot. This actually isn't normal.
Right.
And I think that it's so easy to kind of normalize some of the pain that we're feeling, and some of the exclusion that exists. And so I think coming from Canada, where people have like a very nuanced view on race, like growing up, people wouldn't ever just like refer to me really as Black. Like they would say, oh, she's mixed. I think her father's African. Like there's more nuance there. Like I knew that one of my friends was like, Moroccan Jewish. Like I knew that my other friend was Scottish and Irish. Like I knew, people knew that my grandmother was Irish. And so on St. Patrick's Day, they would say to me, like, Happy St. Patrick's Day. There was like so much more nuance to how we kind of discussed and interacted with and embraced culture. Like we would celebrate at my high school and elementary school, like we would acknowledge all of the holidays.
Yeah.
I remember that. I remember Chinese New Year. I remember all of these different things, right? And it wasn't that any one holiday was a threat on another holiday, right? Like we can be friends. Like we can hold hands. We can eat each other's food. We can celebrate the Chinese New Year without making the regular the New Year that I know of like invalid.
Yeah.
It actually just makes the whole world more colorful and more interesting, and your experience in your life like more creative. It brings a whole other layer of colors into a story when you have that more lenses.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting just to hear the differences. I think for me, being in America, if you have a drop of Black in you and you have brown skin, then like you're Black.
Yeah.
That's how you're treated. That's how you're perceived. And so, I mean, but it's really amazing though that you've had that experience and that journey, because I'm sure that it's allowed you to kind of navigate in a very different way, like maybe a more open way, in white spaces. I don't want to speak for you, but just from what I'm like hearing, it sounds like sometimes I think in America we can get so like pigeonholed in this box of like you're Black, so that means that you don't belong in these spaces, and it just kind of blocks you from even having the dreams to think beyond what you see in front of you.
Right. And also I think like on the other side of that too, with other people, they say like, oh, this person doesn't necessarily belong in this space, right? Or if that person, which I'm sure you know a lot about, like that person, has had a little bit of like, that person has some access to this space, but we're waiting for them to mess up, right?
Mhm.
Or we're waiting for them to show us that actually they shouldn't really be here.
Yeah.
And I think it's the thing that always sticks with me is like racism isn't the shark, it's the water,
Mm.
right? For which we are all submerged. And so it's happening sometimes, and it's really hard to spot. And my grandmother's a pretty complicated person in the book too. She was the first person that I ever heard say the N-word.
Mhm.
And these things have to be consciously and actively unlearned.
Yep.
Right? It's not just going to go away in the same way that I am not from, you know, an LGBTQIA plus experience. So I have to actively learn, right?
Yes.
I do not have a trans experience. I need to actively learn. I have to do that work. And if I'm not prepared to do that work, then I need
Mhm.
to be very aware of my own ignorance,
Right.
not then have the right to chime in any kind of way about what their agenda should be.
Mhm.
And you know, doing that work is hard, and you have to do some real digging. There was a question that people submitted to us that I really want to ask you on this topic too, because I think for me, even like doing this work over the past 3 years has been in racial justice has been so vulnerable, because you have to talk about things that are tough. And you know, you wrote a memoir, I'm writing this memoir, also an incredibly vulnerable experience. Like, how do you, so the question was, how do you stay vulnerable and allow yourself to be vulnerable?
Hmm. Um, I think for me, like as an artist, that's something that you have to be in order to truly go on stage and give of yourself. So I feel like it's something that's so natural for me at this point. Like I've been doing this for like 25 years or something. But I think it's continuing to have conversations, like to process everything that you're experiencing and going through. Like my husband is my sounding board, like for everything, and I think that keeps me honest and vulnerable, by not being afraid to just say everything I'm feeling, I'm thinking, if it sounds, even if it sounds stupid, if it's whatever it is. I think that that just like keeps me present, yeah, and vulnerable. How
Yeah.
about you?
I guess it's the belief that other people feel that way too,
Hmm.
right? And I think, you know, I was at a dinner the other day, and it was not that many people. It was a group of women, and the conversation that we were kind of all having was like a little bit surface. And
Hmm.
I was like, I feel like we could probably go a little bit deeper here, right? But someone basically has to like be the streaker first, right? Like someone has to make like put themselves out there first. And I think that that's kind of the way that we go a little bit deeper and make progress sometimes, right? It's like it's like also in the book, I talk about like what a horrible time financially I had in the beginning with Brother Bellies. That's a
Mhm.
thing we're not supposed to be talking about in fashion, right? Like, but if we don't talk about it, if I'm not vulnerable enough to share that, then no one's going to know that this kind of thing is happening all the time, right? And no one's going to know to look out for it in the next young designer that comes along, to make sure that they're not getting preyed upon too. And so I think that vulnerability in a lot of ways, it can also be a sort of salvation.
Hmm. I mean, this sounds like great advice. Like, but outside of what the amazing things you just said, what advice would you give to someone, stepping into the industry, for the first time, and wanting to, to stay true to themselves, and like what would you say?
Yeah. So I think there's two flip sides to it, right? Um, I'll talk about like my experience with the CFD Vogue Fashion Fund. So that to me was like a complete game changer. And you know, I had this brand, I launched at the flea market, and then to be able to go through that competition and actually get in, and there was 10 of us, and we were competing, and the judges were all like very high profile fashion people, like Anna Wintour. And you know, I ended up being a winner, and I got a lot of money. And that was a big game changer for my business. But after I won, my mom said something to me. I called her and I told her that I won. And she said, I'm very happy for you. I hope this win gives you the freedom to feel like you no longer need to compete in systems that were not built for you.
Hmm. Wow.
And it really like took all of the wind out of my lungs, because it was something I had never considered. And also, it was true,
Hmm.
right? like we constantly are subjecting our art, our work, our personhood for validation to other people,
Yeah.
right? And we're defining our own success by the report card that they're giving us so often.
Mhm.
And so my advice is seek help, seek support, but don't don't digest rejection as any kind of indicator for the value of yourself or what you're doing,
Mhm.
right? Because you have to really radically reimagine what success is for yourself,
Yep.
right? And I was talking to someone the other day that was like, I never would have known that you were having all of these issues with brother bellies because you just looked so successful on the outside,
Mm.
even from the beginning. And I said, well, I was successful, because we were employing all of these artisans around the world. I
Yeah.
was just broke.
Right.
But my standards of what was success to me was about these artisans, because that's what I started out wanting to do, right? And by the way, like, sure, like, do I, like, at a certain point, did I want to also not be broke? Yes, right? But in the beginning, that was like not what it was about. So I was fine just like eating my noodles and like, trying not to get evicted if it meant that like we were going to be able to continue telling this story and involving these artisans in this way and making really beautiful things. And so it's really about finding success on your own terms. And I know it's such a Pollyanna thing to say, but you really need to like fully inhale it, let it get into your lungs and seep into every cell of your body, because otherwise you're just going to be spending your entire life trying to get to the destination, and life is the journey.
Right. Oh, I love that. You just, kept your integrity and, the root of your passion, it's just really beautiful. What do you hope readers take away from this beautiful memoir?
I think it's a deep truth that you can make all of the mistakes, you can trip, you can fall, but you have to realize that actually stumbling is evidence of momentum.
Hmm.
And when you see another person fall as well, like, pick them up, right? And that person will hopefully be there to pick you up too. By the way, we do not pick up others because we want them to owe us a favor.
Mhm.
Pick up others because it's the right thing to do as a human on this planet,
Yeah.
right? And I think, like, for me, I want people to understand that their mistakes that they've made in life or their stumbles are exactly the thing that's going to help point them in the direction of the thing that they were called to do here. You know,
Yeah.
that's the message for me. There was another question that I have to ask you because I'm dying to know the answer, which is, do you remember the moment you committed to yourself and the dream?
Mm. I mean, I feel like I have a very unique and unusual path, than most ballet dancers. But, I started dancing when I was 13. So it was very late. And I would say within a month, I knew, and
Wow.
I kind of just surrendered, I guess you could say, to this commitment. I was at the time, my single mom raised me and my 5 siblings on her own, and we were living in a motel at the time in a single room, and it was like this moment where it was like, oh, like I can be more than my circumstances. And that was the first time that I ever realized that. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't that it was like this way out or whatever that means, or way back in a way where I could like help my community, but that I was good at something and I was passionate about it and someone believed in me. And so my teacher had me move in with her, a month or so after I started dancing, and
Wow.
I trained vigorously for the next 4 years. And with only 4 years of ballet training under my belt, I moved to New York and joined American Ballet Theater. So I knew very early on, the commitment and the sacrifice, and that I was willing to give of myself to my art form, and that it was what I was going to do with my life.
Woo, that gave me like all the chills.
What about you?
Oh my gosh, wow. I think it took me definitely longer. I bounced around a lot. I had a lot of different jobs in my early 20s, and I think I really fully committed myself 300% to a job that I had working for someone else, and I was totally burning out. And I said to myself after I left that job, like, I actually really need to commit this much to myself. I was just seeing how much I was doing and how undervalued I was there. And I mean, really doing Misty, like I was working like 60 hours a week. Like I think I was making $11 an hour. Like I was really doing all the things. And it was then, I think, and I didn't know yet what my thing would be, right? And that's also why I thought the question was so good. Like, do you remember the moment you committed to yourself and the dream? So I think I committed to myself then, and I gave myself space and time to figure out what my dream was. And I think now I know that my dream is really about supporting people who have been historically excluded, and amplifying underrepresented communities. And I think that is Brother Bellies, and it's also the 15% pledge.
It's incredible. I mean, your life, I think you've kept moving. This forward motion, I think, has allowed you to find what it is you're meant to do, and you found it. And it's so incredible to watch and to have witnessed. And it's just an honor to be here having this conversation with you, to have read Wildflower. And I wish you and the book all the success in the world. And I can't wait to come together and do something else.
I know, me too. Thank you so much for doing this today. It was so awesome. I appreciate you so much. I'm so nervous about this book, and like just knowing you, knowing that you've done it, like it makes me feel a little bit more safer in this space too, by the way, which also counts.
Yeah.
Something. I know there's like a lot of shelves that we'll be on together, and that makes me feel a little less alone out there in the world.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thanks, Misty. I'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.